everyone, and welcome to We Are ACEDS Live, where we talk with industry experts and leaders on all things e-discovery. And today we are in for a really special treat because we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of ACEDS. And so we've brought some veterans back to talk with us. We are joined today by William F. Hamilton, Senior Legal Skills Professor at the University of Florida Levin College of Law, and Tom O'Connor, industry veteran and director of Gulf Coast Legal Technology Center. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today, and happy anniversary, ACEDS.
Hey, Mike.
Hello, Mike, and happy anniversary, ACEDS, indeed. 10 years, wow.
It's been a while. It's kind of amazing, actually, when you think about it. We go back, and Bill, I want to say it's even sort of the foundation of our friendship. So I'm grateful for that. But let's go back to the beginning for a minute, Bill. You were there at the very beginning. I think you got the original call. You might have been the first call. I don't know. I was somewhere down the food chain. But tell us a little bit of how you got involved. What was the world like 10 years ago in e-discovery, and what do you think sort of gave rise to ACEDS?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here chatting with you and Tom about it. Yeah, a couple of us got together, back over 10 years ago, and we were kind of surveying the state of e-discovery. It was back in 2010. It's almost hard to believe it was that long ago, and it was a chaotic world in the way of e-discovery. I mean, e-discovery had just kind of hit law firms in the 2004-2005 frame with Judge Schindler's orders in the Zubelet case. Law firms, some of the bigger firms, were catching on. You had the Sedona Conference was going to become a little more well known. Their work was being referenced in a couple of cases. EDRM was beginning to do work more emphasizing vendor side stuff. But for the average lawyer and practitioner out in a law firm, it was a chaotic world. You didn't know where to turn exactly to get advice, to get expertise. And on top of that, you didn't know what you didn't know in some respects. So, some attorneys may have gotten the message about preservation, but they knew nothing at all about search. Or some attorneys may have thought they're pretty good at putting keyword searches together, but had no idea what indexing was and how a database was created that allowed you to do search and then even using it in the courtroom. So you had tons of people that were kind of touching this large creature and not getting anywhere with it. And there was lots of gaps in the process. And that was the painful part, was the gaps, because that leads to mistakes. Gaps led to errors. Gaps led to sanctions. And what was really apparent to those of us right at the very beginning, and one of the reasons that ACEDS needed to be formed and part of ACEDS' continuing mission, is that the judicial process needed it. I mean, all of a sudden we had this fundamental change that kind of crept us on us overnight, where paper was gone. And now we're dealing with electronically stored information. And this created wonderful opportunities, but it created challenges as well. So those challenges are manyfold, but the rewards are equally great. And if our judicial process, our litigation system, our dispute resolution process, which is, a fundamental component of our government, was going to work, we had to be able to make sure people understood we knew what we were doing, and we had to make sure that this adversarial process worked. And that's something that I think people tend to forget a little bit, that our whole judicial process is based on a kind of a notion of clash. It's almost like a physics experiment that we did in high school, or a chemistry experiment where you throw the forces together. And then out of that, because of the conflict in a public space, the truth emerges. So if you're not using the information that's available, you're not going to get the kind of reaction that you need that's going to produce the truth in the litigation process, and that's going to make people trust in the process. And institutional trust is critical. So we're looking at all this back, 10 years ago and saying, well, how are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to provide some consistency within the practice? And of course, it wasn't merely attorneys. We had wonderful litigation support professionals. We had wonderful consultants, but they were doing different things at different times in different places. We wanted to pull that whole world together into one body that was working on the problem. And that was kind of the mission of ACEDS, to come up with baseline certification, so that if you were an e-discovery professional, you had to basically have passed the ACEDS examination. You really couldn't put that name on yourself. And beyond that, we also wanted to provide a standard that would grow with the industry, because now, my humble opinion is every litigator needs to be ACEDS certified. You can't be out there handling this information, handling electronically stored information, without that base level certification that ACEDS provides, so that you know what you're doing. Now, that's not to say that that's all you're doing. I mean, I was a trial attorney for most of my life, 30 years, until I became a professor recently. And of course, I did ACEDS, and we put it together while I was a practicing attorney. So the idea was that attorneys need this. This is not some specialized, isolated skill. This is a central component of who we are going to be going forward. So that's kind of was the original motivation and driving force behind ACEDS, and those of us that kind of put it together at the very, very beginning.
I'm so thrilled that you recounted all of that for us, because I can never think of all those things all at once in the same thought. And it's amazing that you just brought it all out in just
I'm taking notes here to write down some of the things.
Tom, tell me, where were you? When was it that you first heard of ACEDS, and how do you feel like it's sort of impacted the industry, the legal industry, the e-discovery industry, or any subpart thereof?
Well, I first heard of it through Mary Mack, of course. Mary and I had worked together at FIOS many years ago. And we were trying to talk before we went online about, early memories. My first couple of memories were of a couple of conferences that ACEDS put on that I attended just as a regular attendee. I liked the fact that there were a serious amount of judges who were involved, and the educational component was high. As Bill said, it was the wild, wild west in the early days of e-discovery.
Yeah.
I mean, you had, vendors floating around and consultants, and, many of us knew a little bit, but I think Bill used the analogy of the people touching different parts of the elephant, and saying that they had a good understanding of, myself included. And we were all just kind of feeling our way. So that was my early concept of ACEDS, was, wow, finally somebody's going to try to bring this together. As Bill said, I wrote this down, a central component, that there would be a central component that people could look to. And I just thought that was absolutely essential. We just needed that so much. And the other part of it was that it became very clear, like all technology, that this was evolving, not just constantly, but faster than most attorneys were used to dealing with. Yeah. We are not, by training, a remarkably fast-moving group of people. As I forget who it was, one judge at a conference said once that it might have been Monty Ahalt from Maryland, said, we're one of the few professions that we practice by looking in the rear view mirror. We want to look at precedent. We want to look at what came before. We want to know who said what about something ahead of time. Well, technology isn't that way. Technology is changing all the time. And you look even now with the case law, there's new cases coming out constantly as technology changes. And, just keeping on top of that, even at firms that had competent people working inside, to keep up with the changes in just e-discovery and the technology components of that is a monumental task. So having an organization that could focus that for you, that could be that central component, that was the big attraction for me.
Yeah, and I would add that, I don't remember exactly when I was contacted, but it was sometime in 2010, and it just struck me then that it was an industry in desperate search of standards. And of course, we had the EDRM, the workflow that we pretty much build all our processes on, but we never really nobody ever thought to, what are the 10 things you need to know about each step across the EDRM? What are that handful of things that you just got to get right in order for this to be successful? And that's what attracted me to it. And well, I mean, we could easily say the rest is history, but there was Bill, as I understand, a gathering of lawyers and legal technology professionals. They wrote a study guide. They wrote hundreds and hundreds of questions, and before we knew it, by the end of 2010, I think the first exam was sat, and I don't know who it is off the top of my head, but we were actually trying to figure out who it was. The first exam was sat actually on December 29th, 2010.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
we really didn't know back then what this was going to entail. The idea was, well, let's do this, and we'll have a certification examination, which will basically establish this baseline. And then it was like, well, how do we do that? And of course, we had to hire a consultant to come in and we found out that certification is an industry in and of itself.
yes.
And you have to do this right, and you have to do it with metrics that are measurable, testify, you can test, and they're verifiable. So, we're kind of trying to do this on a little bit of a shoestring budget. So, we had our first meeting in a Miami Beach motel, about 2 blocks off the beach, and rented out some kind of rooms in it that didn't have the best lighting in the world, as I recall. And the consultant came in, and we spent like 2 solid days just going through every step of the e-discovery process, spelling it out into concepts, and taking those concepts and turning those concepts into questions and grouping them together. And you're right, we pulled together exactly what ACEDS is still doing to this day. Expertise from all corners of the discovery world. I mean, we had lawyers at the first meeting on the first board. We had people that were consultants and specialists in processing, people who were specialists in review. We had attorneys that were specialists in managing court proceedings and court processes. So all of us together, this wonderful compendium of people from different areas that were the top in their fields, obviously, came together, and we just kind of hunkered down and put this together. And of course, after we put it together, then we had to build it out some more. We had to test it. And I know you're still going through that process today, Mike, as you build out new and different versions of the certification examination.
It's actually
really something that's important, because as Tom was saying, it was the Wild West, and all of a sudden we're saying, now wait a minute, you want to say you have e-discovery competence, this is how you have to show it.
Yeah, it's actually interesting, because the learning objectives, which honestly anybody who's in education, they kind of form the foundation of anything you're trying to teach, right? Those objectives have really stood the test of time, and I know that because having just recently refreshed the exam, the learning objectives haven't really changed that much. We've tweaked them a little bit. There's been some changes in the law. There's been some changes in technology, things like machine learning, and so forth. But so we've added a couple of things, but for the most part, those core learning objectives against which we test and really validate someone's knowledge and skill, they really haven't changed that much. The processes have pretty much stayed the same. The technologies have changed, but what you need to know to get this right hasn't changed that much. Tom, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just to follow on that point, which I think is really kind of a fun story too, is it wasn't just an idea that we had, Mike, and those of us who were working together at the beginning. It was a passion and a commitment.
Yeah.
No one was really getting paid for this. It was really volunteer work for just about everybody involved. But the funny thing is when you do things like this, you never know what's going to happen. It's a little bit of, if you build it, will they come? And I can remember our first meeting that we had for ACEDS was at a relatively nice hotel on Miami Beach. And the conference was supposed to start at 9 o'clock or 8:30, whatever time it was. And of course, we were there early with a half an hour to go, and there wasn't a soul at the conference. And then all of a sudden, there was an army of people came, just like out of the blue, out of the woods. And it was this wonderful, amazing event with hundreds of people clamoring and talking and wanting to speak and listening to the presenters. And that tradition goes today. So the thing that's really important is This is not some fantasy that we came up with. This was a crying need that the industry had, and we've met that need with ACEDS, and we're continuing to meet that need with ACEDS.
I met people at that first conference that are dear friends today, and I'll never forget the very first presentation I did for ACEDS was how to build a litigation support department at a law firm. It was fascinating. Tom, thoughts on the history, and let's go into a little bit like what is the future of training and education and e-discovery? Where are we all going? The certification is great, but we really want to educate at the end of the day. That's part of the ACEDS mission. What does the future of e-discovery education look like, Tom?
Well, I think it's becoming, we've evolved from the wild, wild west into some really defined categories and some new areas that we didn't even think about 10 years ago. I mean, I was just writing down, if you think about all of these topics have really cropped up in the past several years. Info governance, TAR, AI, the rise of social media, cybersecurity, privacy, and international law. Not that those weren't topics in the law, but the impact on e-discovery has made those extremely important. And then at the same time, the pressure from bar associations for increased technical competence on the part of attorneys. So I think that the future is pressure to do this, as Bill said, pressure to say, if you're going to say that you're skilled in this area, you have been trained and can certify that you have been trained in these steps, these processes. So a defined workflow with some real specific components to it now. I was involved in am involved in a case that's going on right now where, there's just a dogfight over what version of continuous active learning should be used. I mean, that's something that you wouldn't have heard 10 years ago, right? I don't think we even had the phrase continuous active learning 10 years ago. So we're becoming, I guess, like all professions, there's much more specialization in terms of knowledge. Not that we are specialists in this technology, but we have to have an understanding. And as Bill said, the ability to it goes back to the old Judge Peck saying, it's time to bring your geek to court. Yeah. Right. You've got to be able to bring those two worlds together and have some sort of a common ground to understand what you're talking about. Yeah.
Hey, Bill, you're teaching the e-discovery, one of the few curriculum that I know of at a prominent law school. What's your take on the future of e-discovery education, and particularly on the law firms, on the law school side?
Well, of course, I'm a firm believer in introducing our students to the basics of electronic discovery. It's just an absolutely essential skill that you have to have in order to survive, to represent your clients well, to be successful as a lawyer, and obviously to carry forth our mission as professionals. So, we are dedicated to that at the University of Florida Levin College of Law. I think we're the only law school in the nation that offers e-discovery every semester. And we have a big pool of students. My average class is, 50 students a class, 50, 60 students every semester. And we have a relatively small law school, 250 each class. So that's a good chunk of students getting e-discovery basics and foundation. And to what Tom was talking about, and why I think it's so important for lawyers to have a background, as I was a lawyer, to have a background in electronic discovery and really to be ACEDS certified, to test it out, because the proof is in the pudding, is you've got to have these skill sets to understand the issues. It's really, lawyers like to talk about issue spotting. E-discovery education is issue spotting. I need to be able to talk to my consultant, to talk to Tom about what's the index going to look like that we're going to use in the case, because the index is going to determine what our search capabilities are going to be. Now, I don't need to know the in and outs of all nearest neighbor searching and Bayesian searching and that sort of stuff, but I do need to know that the index forms the basis of it, and I do need to know it costs money, that the greater and the more powerful the index, the greater the cost. So these are the kinds of discussions I have to have and be able to have if I'm going to guide my client's case to success. And it's not something I can hand off to anybody, because when push comes to shove, I'm the person that is going to be in front of a judge justifying the Rule 26G certification that I just made. It's not going to be Tom. It may be beside me in court, but I'm the one that has a license to practice law. So lawyers have to be on top of this so that we know what we're doing and we can guide this process and understand the basics. And I think that's the fundamentals of e-discovery education in a law school. Now, at the same time, law firms and vendors have to step up, and they've got to be willing to give advanced training, because we can't do everything in law school. My e-discovery course is one semester. I've got 13, 14 weeks. I've got to cover so much material. I can only spend a week on artificial intelligence, maybe 2 weeks at most on artificial intelligence. So the firms have got to step up and make sure that they're giving their associates an adequate training in this, so their career will flourish in these various areas. Same with vendors. And what's really exciting for us at Florida is we're seeing vendors coming and saying, we need people that have the legal chops as well as the technical chops to be able to act as that go-between between the corporation, the law firm, and the alternative legal service provider or the consultant. And we love what you're doing at Florida, because you're giving us people that have this immediate skill set that we can even enhance, that's going to make our business go forward, because essentially e-discovery is a collaborative activity. There's no way to get around it.
So that's a perfect segue. Last thing I wanted to ask about was career paths in e-discovery. And I know I've been involved with you at UF Law. And I know we're always talking about, what do the students want to know? What else is out there besides, going to be a first year at a big law firm and whatever. So Tom, what do you see as other alternative routes for kids coming out of law school? Are there career paths that don't sort of follow the traditional lawyer path?
Well, sure. I think, first of all, there's in an area that's near and dear to my heart, there's an enormous consultative need in small, in rural area law firms where technology is not as widespread as it is in the big cities, in the big firms. But also, corporations are bringing so much of this in-house. There's an enormous boom in corporations looking for this skill set specifically to deal with things and be the person who talks to the outside law firm and has that, as Bill said, that go-between status. And I think there's also specialty attorneys who have just an e-discovery practice. Look at Kelly Twigger, for example, who is retained as an e-discovery attorney and co-counsel with the firm on a case. So you can carve out that niche for yourself. And I think that to a lesser extent, only because of budgets, I think this will happen more in the next several years, that you're going to see areas in the government agency respect as they need this skill set as well. The bottom line is, as Bill said, this is a skill set that is required all across the breadth of our profession. So it isn't just a come in as a 1L and start reviewing documents. There's a host of other things you can do with this sort of knowledge.
So I'd love to wrap up with some word association, but we don't have any time. But what I will ask you each, starting with you, Bill, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Association of Certified E-Discovery Specialists?
Good people, competence, and the future that we're going to make together.
Fantastic. Love it. Tom, your thoughts on that question?
Education. Yeah. It's all about educating people so that they have the proper skill sets.
And that's what we talk about. So a couple of notifications. One really quick, the University of Florida, where Bill teaches, actually has an e-discovery conference coming up in early 2021. Stay tuned for announcements on that. We'll be involved.
Let me jump in on that. That's going to be an exciting conference. We're really doing some new things this year, Mike, as you know. Because of COVID, it's going to be a totally online conference. We've pioneered online attendance over the years with a kind of a hybrid conference. This time we've got to go to be safe for all of us. We're going to go to a purely online. It's March 18th. And here's the wonderful kicker. It's going to be free for everybody. So it's totally virtual and totally free. March 18th.
A lot of people lose sight of that. I've been involved with that conference for years and years from the beginning, and it's always been streamed live. So we predated COVID. That's an interesting idea. Also, this evening, make note, we are celebrating here at ACEDS our 10-year anniversary. So tonight we're having a 10-year celebration with a trivia game show event. And reach out to us for an invite to that. The show starts at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then finally, in honor of our 10-year anniversary, we're going to end this live stream today with our 10-year anniversary video, where we asked members of ACEDS a series of questions that kind of span the last 10 years. So stay tuned for about 2 minutes after we go off the air, and it'll play for you. Thanks so much to both of you gentlemen for joining me today. Thank you, everyone who tuned in, and happy anniversary, ACEDS.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye, Tom. Bye, Mike.
Bye, Bill.
On the occasion of the 10th anniversary of ACEDS, I want to take a minute to recall the past.
My favorite memory that I can talk about?
I have so many memories of ACEDS.
When we met as a board for the first time in 2020.
Putting together the Toronto board and talking about expanding ACEDS into Canada.
There are quite a few to pick from, but I suppose our first ACEDS Awards night.
The year that Jared Consiglia announced that e-discovery was moving towards cybersecurity, it was like a light bulb went off for me.
Considering the times that we're in now, my favorite ACEDS moments were way back in the day when there used to be, conferences down in Florida.
A time at the Waffle House in Jacksonville, Florida.
The launch of the ACEDS UK chapter.
Working with folks on the ACEDS team to really help bring education to the community.
The process that we went through in redeveloping the certification for the first time, and that was it was an amazing experience for me.
When I passed the discovery exam, so when I left the exam room, I yelled out, "Yes!" And someone who was in the hallway said, "So you passed?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I did."
Quite a lot to me, I suppose, from a sentimental point of view, in that from a community perspective, it has given me the ability to actually have a community.
It's a community, but it's also like family. It's where you go to get leading edge information regarding this industry.
Allows us to be connected with like-minded colleagues, those in the industry who have, an interest in legal technology, an interest in legal.
It provides a mountain of education, networking opportunities.
When you think about ACEDS, you think about the competency.
It's a great way to get to know people.
Getting together, networking, sharing ideas.
Invaluable opportunities for the e-discovery professional to network with like-minded individuals.
It helps underpin the integrity of the judicial system.
It means uplifting each other in an environment that allows us to be our best selves.
So I got involved in ACEDS fairly early on. I believe I started in May of 2011. There were probably, 20 of us.
Involvement with ACEDS goes back to literally the very beginning.
My original involvement dates back to the early days of ACEDS. Bill Hamilton was instrumental in getting ACEDS off the ground.
I first got involved with ACEDS back in 2011.
About 5 years ago.
Back in 2015.
I've been tracking the e-discovery community for over a decade, easily.
So I've been with ACEDS since the very start. was part of the first group of folks to, help design, the exam and the questions.
I've been a member of ACEDS for just over 5 years.
November of 2015.
I think it was like 2011.
About 5 or 6 years ago.
Years ago, when Rob Robinson, one of the most knowledgeable and best people in our profession, said, hey, let's go to lunch and talk about ACEDS. So we had a lunch, we talked about all the great things ACEDS was doing, and it's been my honor to be involved ever since.
I really describe ACEDS, I think, in 3 words. But what I would say in a phrase is that they are industry experts with a supportive and collaborative culture.
The first word that I would use to describe ACEDS is dynamic.
ECA, education, certification, and activities.
Empowering collaborative communities.
Excellence in e-discovery.
Professionalism, education, and fellowship.
Focused, conscientious, and practical.
Technology, law, and collaboration.
Community, first and foremost. Engagement, and amiable.
Friends, colleagues, resources.
I'm so excited to be presiding over the 10-year anniversary of ACEDS, and I want to thank each and every one of our members, all of our CED certified professionals, our business partners, advisory board, and the incredible team we have here at ACEDS. Without all of you, ACEDS simply does not exist. And for that reason, I personally, and we as an organization, are thankful to all of you for all of your continued support. So congratulations to ACEDS. Together, we will continue to build and enjoy more milestones like this over the years to come.